It's not just standing at a street corner and yelling at strangers. Derwin Gray will show you how to actually share Jesus with others. We'll look at an example in the Bible where God used the Israelite enemies for their good. And Michael Jarman's mastery of an everyday office app has won him money, respect, and a cell in the Hall of Heroes. Coming up in episode 113 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, Dr. Derwin Gray. He's also a pastor, and his new book is called Lit Up with Love, Becoming Good News People to a Gospel-Starved World. Dr. Gray, what do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
Man, that's a great question. The biggest challenge that men face today is sin. That's the biggest challenge. So let me extrapolate that. So the word technically, sin means to miss the mark, right? So if you're shooting a bow and arrow at a bullseye and you miss, that's called sin. So whether in Old Testament or New Testament, sin is to miss the mark. Well, God has a mark for a man. God has a mark for humanity. And that mark is Jesus. So Jesus, the eternal Son of God, became flesh and lived among us. And so Jesus in his humanity is God's living portrait of saying, this is what a man looks like. And so when you look at Jesus, you see not only someone who tells the Pharisees, hey, you're whitewashed tombs. You're looking at someone who tells Peter, get from behind me, Satan. But he's also the one who meets a Samaritan woman at a well, overcoming racism and misogyny. He also tells his disciples, get out of the way, man, bring the children to me. But then ultimately, the mark of a man looks like a bloody cross and an empty tomb. So a man looks like love. And love is not sentimental. Love is not weak. Love is actually power beyond our comprehension, because love is God, 1 John 4:8, and Jesus embodies that. So when I talk to men about becoming a man, and we have a very manly church, we talk about, listen, if you want to know what a man looks like, you don't have to go to various cultural icons to find out what a man. You could actually go to Jesus, because he's the prototype of what a man looks like. So sin gets in the way of that. The gospel clears that.
Love that. We were talking a little bit before the interview. I would love to hear a little bit about your story too, of your journey to becoming a man. And I feel like, a lot of people would look at you and be like, oh, you're a man's man. You played in the NFL. Like, you're like, every other guy wishes that we could be at your place. But I know that your story is full of moments of, I was at the peak of where I should just have complete satisfaction and happiness, but it wasn't through that, was it?
Yeah, so I think there are, depending on the culture you're in, there's different portraits of what it means to be a man, right? So playing in the NFL is like, okay, that's what it means to be a man, right? So just because you're good at something on a football field doesn't mean you're good at being a man off the field. So for me, being an NFL player, I was responsible, I was intentional, I was passionate, I was studied, I was ready to be an NFL player. I was a much better NFL player than I was a man. Outside of the field, I was what I like to call emotionally constipated. I suppressed emotions. I wasn't able to communicate with my wife. I wasn't able to communicate my feelings. I was passive. The only thing I was aggressive about was actually playing the game, right? So my journey into manhood took place when I met Christ. So I didn't grow up in church. Football was, in essence, was my God. And so in Texas, that's just what we do. Played at a great high school. I had great coaches. I learned discipline. I learned sacrifice. I learned teamwork. I learned a lot of incredible things about manhood, became a great player, got a football scholarship, ended up meeting my wife my freshman year, and everything's going great for us. Football is a great God until you can't make it happy anymore. My rookie year, I get drafted by the Colts in 93. I wasn't playing much. 94, I'm playing better. 95, I'm a team captain. I'm on top of the world. But it was at that moment when I realized there's got to be more. So despite my NFL status, despite my investment portfolio. I can't love my wife the way she deserves to be loved because I can't love myself. I can't forgive my father who was not involved in my life. I couldn't forgive things that happened to me. I couldn't forgive myself for stuff that I had done. Also, I knew this. The NFL stands for not for long. So what would I do? Who would I be when I didn't play anymore? And those thoughts haunted me. I had an existential crisis at 25. Then the next year, I started getting injuries. But I had a teammate with the Colts that for 5 years, he would share Christ with me, and his methodology was a little different. I share the story in my book, Lit Up with Love, but his nickname was the Naked Preacher. His real name was Steve Grant, but dude would literally take a shower hour after practice, dry off, wrap a towel around his waist, and ask my teammates, do you know Jesus? And I asked the veterans on the team, what's up with the half naked black man walking around naked, right? So, but one day he asked me a question that changed my life. He said, do you know Jesus? And like most people who don't know the saving work of Jesus, I gave him my resume. Hey, I don't do this. I don't do this. I haven't done this. I haven't done this. So basically, I was judging my goodness by putting other people down, which is sin. And so he just gently said, so our comparison ain't with other people. It's actually with the glory of God, and the glory of God is Jesus. And I said, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, what you do and what I do can never be good enough to reach God. But because God is loving, he becomes good enough for us in Jesus. And Jesus died on the cross for our sins. And he rose again to now live in us and give us purpose and power in his kingdom. So I was a little hard-headed. That took multiple years for that to take root. But August 2nd, 1997, in a small dorm room in Anderson, Indiana, my 5th year in NFL training camp with the Colts, went back to my dorm room after lunch, and I called my wife and I said, I want to be more committed to you, and I want to be committed to Jesus. And that's when I was reborn. That's when I was made spiritually alive. That's when I was forgiven of sins. That's when Jesus invaded and occupied my life. That's when Jesus made me his own. And that began my journey towards manhood, right? And so God brought some incredible mentors into my life. A gentleman by the name of Alan Bacon. He mentored me in the word, but he mentored me in manhood. I saw how he loved his wife. I saw how he parented his kids. I saw how consistent he was at work. And so he was teaching me through our relationship. That began my journey to manhood. And neither my wife nor I grew up in church. And so we threw ourselves into the Bible, into the gospel. We started studying marriage. We started studying what does it mean to be a husband and a wife.
I love that. And I feel like, I'm sure you would agree that that started you, of course, on your journey of faith and becoming a pastor and, getting a PhD or getting your doctorate, which is an incredible story in itself, but also has brought you to write this book, which is called Lit Up with Love, Becoming Good News People to a Gospel-Starved World. So let's get into the book now, Pastor Derwin. What does it mean to be lit up with love?
So what it means to be lit up with love is simply this, that a person comes to the point that the greatest treasure they have is Jesus, that they are overwhelmed by the simple reality that we were lost, undone, wrecked, and ruined, and Jesus on the cross reached his hand into the flames and said, I want you. That he looked at us and said, your resume isn't good enough. You are a sinner, but while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. A person lit up with love is a person whose heart and mind is captivated by the redeeming work of Jesus. And what happens is we begin to focus not on how much we love Jesus, but how much he loves us. And then that love begins to fill the cracks in our soul. That love begins to mend the broken places in our heart. That love begins to heal us into the men God created us to be. And then it moves us to go on mission with Jesus, upward, inward, outward. And so I wrote Lit Up with Love so people would see the depth of God's love, because it's God's love that heals us. It's God's love that transforms us, but it transforms the broken pieces of us. And then we go, how can I give this away. So as men, we're great at talking about football. We're great at talking about politics, and we talk about all this stuff, but we're not so great at talking about Jesus. Like I want to be a part of a generation of men that get more excited about Jesus than who wins the Super Bowl. Like I want to be a part of creating a generation of men that are leading their families to Christ, that are leading their coworkers to Christ, not because they have a formula or a plan, but their life radiates with the power and goodness of God. And here's the thing, Andy, there are so many men who don't think they can change. I might go off a little bit here, so I'm just letting you know so you don't freak out. I know we're just getting to meet each other. So much of Christianity is not Christianity, bro. So much of Christianity is behavioral modification with external things you do. It's how do I not sin? How do I not watch porn? How do I not lust? How do I not have greed? How do I? Notice where the focus is. I. And what you create is a bunch of Pharisees who don't know God, or you create a bunch of men who are in despair who don't know God. And so what Lit Up with Love does is it moves us from behavioral modification to look and to gaze at the redeeming work of Jesus, because Jesus changes Derwin. Jesus changes Andy. The only thing he asks us for is to trust him. How could you not want to give that away to your homies? How could you not want to give that way to the other men in your life?
Yeah, then you turn into the guy that is in a towel and walking around the locker room.
Yeah, so I don't recommend being a naked preacher, though. You might get arrested at your job. Let's not do that, okay?
Okay. There's so many great things in the book. I thought this was interesting, too, because I think a lot of the hang-ups that we have, people would say, and I would say this, too, like, I've tried it before. I've tried to share Jesus with others, and it doesn't always go that great. And you think, then what's the point? But you talk about that's one of the hangups that we have. And it's, we need to get past that. Then when we don't see immediate results, and you talk about sharing Jesus with a guy in your life, Matt, the atheist, as you call him in the book.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to apologize on behalf of all pastors. Typically, when we teach how to share your faith, we use what's called the confrontational method. The confrontational method is like, okay, let's go downtown, let's hand out tracts, let's knock on doors. I'm not against that. We just don't teach that at our church. It's very few people who are effective at that. The other way we teach it is proclamational, like, you get up, you preach, right? Mm-hmm. Well, very few people do that. What we teach is what's called relationship, right? It is a relationship, and it starts with prayer, care, share. Prayer, care, share. So one of the things that I do is twice a week, I go into a coffee shop. I write books in there. I do my sermons in there. People go, aren't you interrupted a lot? I say, no, those are divine appointments, birth and prayer. I pray for God to bring people to me that need him. And then I begin to hear their story. I begin to build relationship. I begin to care with them, and I begin to share with them. Some conversations have been going on for 2 and 3 years. Some have gone on for 4 months. Some of them, there are people that come to faith immediately. So understanding that people coming to faith is a process. And I write about it in the book. There's people who till the soil. There's people who throw seeds in the soil. There's people who water the soil. And there's people who harvest the seeds when they grow. But I can't bring anybody to faith. You can't bring anybody to faith. Only the Holy Spirit does that. 1 Peter chapter 3, 6 and 7 says this. Paul says, I planted, but Apollos watered. But God gave the increase. The one who plants and waters is nothing, but God who gives the increase. So God doesn't call us to make someone come to faith. He does invite us to share those gospel seeds. So some conversations you're tilling the soil. Some conversations you're watering the soil, right? So with Matthew was an atheist. He was a personal trainer. And a friend of mine who was sharing her faith with him said, he's asking me some questions about suffering and evil, and I can't answer them. Will you meet with him? So we sat down to meet. And so I said, man, I just want to know your story. I want to hear your heart. He had gone through a lot of suffering. And he said, if God is all loving and all powerful, why is there evil and suffering? And I said, man, listen, I understand that. I get that. But keep this in mind. You don't know what evil and suffering is unless there's a standard of goodness. And that standard of goodness has to come from somewhere. I believe that's Jesus. That's why he entered the world, to show us what the goodness of God is. So every time you say that something's evil, you're actually saying, I'm making a comparison with something that's good. And the author of goodness is God. And, also, I think a better question is, why would a good God come to an earth where the human beings who hurt each other, enslave each other, are cruel to each other, pollute the planet, but yet dies on a cross to forgive sin so they can be a part of his cleanup project, right? So anyway, Matthew and I talk, build a relationship, some time goes by, and he shows up at church. And someone comes to him and says, hey, there's a guy in the lobby and he's crying. So I go out there, I see it's Matthew, and I'm kind of surprised that he's there because he's an atheist. And he says, my mom has died, and he falls right into my chest. And I embrace him and I'm praying for him. Several more conversations, asking him to read the New Testament, started in the Gospel of John. And Matt comes to faith. Well, that was a process of him coming to faith. And so we have to think in terms of the long game. Just because someone doesn't come to faith today doesn't mean those seeds lay dormant. So prayer, care, share.
I thought it was interesting in your book too, because, I'm a guy. I want to be told, like, this is how you do things, A, B, C. But you have a chapter called Starved for Rest. Mm-hmm. So as guys, like, we're working. So talk about rest, and how do we offer rest to others, and how do we accept it ourselves?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is I want to lay a foundation, because we as men, we're hardwired to go hunt. We're hardwired to do stuff. So when I talk about rest, I'm not talking about not doing anything. So I just want to pause. So since 2000, I've gotten a master's degree. I've gotten a doctorate. I've written 9 books. I've planted a church, a whole bunch of other things, been a husband and being a dad. So when I talk about learning to rest, I'm not talking about laziness. I'm not talking about being productive. I'm actually talking about learning to live from the resources and the power of God, which makes you more productive, which makes you utilize your time more effectively. Our culture is tired. The highest ethnic demographic that's committing suicide in America is white men over the age of 50. People are tired. People have pursued and chased dreams only to find out that it did not give them the satisfaction and the joy and purpose they were looking for. One of the reasons why we're tired is, particularly as men, we believe we have to build a resume to impress other people, to impress our wives, to impress God. And we're so busy trying to build a resume, not realizing that it's never enough. Good enough is never arrived. Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit and the Father's mercy, allows us to enter into his rest. What does that mean? First, it means this, that when you and I get ready to show God our resume of all we've done to impress him, he looks at it and he says, son, put that down. And he calls his other son, his eternal son, Jesus. And he says, Jesus, let me see your resume. And it says sinless. It says savior. It says redeemer. And at the bottom, it says, Derwin, he is your enough. There's only one resume that qualifies for relationship in God's kingdom with the Father, and that's Jesus. So for 33 years, Jesus lived this perfect, sinless life because I couldn't, and the other men listening now couldn't. He died on the cross. His atonement wipes away our sin, forgives us, declares us righteous, makes us forever friends of God. And on the third day, when he rose again, he now lives in us. So now we don't live for God's approval. We live from God's approval. And that takes the pressure off and it puts on grace. And so now I'm not living a life to go, look how good I am. I'm living a life saying, look at the goodness of God through me. And so fear gets stripped away. Andy, I'm a compulsive stutterer. For 26 years of my life, I was a compulsive stutterer. Speaking in front of people was one of the worst things ever because I stuttered and people made fun of me. But when I met Jesus, he took that stuttering away by challenging me to trust him. So when I first got a speaking engagement to go speak, I was like, God, seriously, why me? Surely there's some other dudes. I can pray. I can send money. Why you want to send me? Like this is a weakness. And he goes, exactly. I love to take weaknesses and make them a strength. You've been striving for so long. I want you to rest and watch me work. And man, I speak all over the world. I'm a pastor of a church. I'm talking to Andy, Manly with Andy, right? The first wedding I went to was my own at 21. How it is I'm going into 33 years of marriage. How could those things take place? Because there's a God who says, if you rest in me, I can now work. I can do exceedingly above and beyond all you think, hope, or imagine.
So good. One more thing, and again, check out the book. Lots of great advice, how to actually share Jesus with others. The book is called Lit Up with Love, Becoming Good News People to a Gospel-Starved World. Someone's listening to this podcast as they're driving to work. And so they're amped up and they just want to know, what should I do? What's that next step when I step out of my car to be a good news person to a gospel-starved world?
Yeah. So the first thing you do is when you step out of that car is you pray. Is you say, Lord, today I want to see your face. Today I want to experience your grace. Today I want to walk in your power. And today, would you bring people to me who are yet to discover how good you are? And give me the words to say that they would see you. And then when God does, be prepared to be a relationship. Ask questions, listen. And then lastly, share your faith.
Now taking a look at the Bible, picking it up in Judges 3, starting in verse 1. These are the nations that the Lord left in the land to test those Israelites who had not experienced the wars of Canaan. He did this to teach warfare to the generations of Israelites who had no experience in battle. These are the nations: the Philistines, those living under the 5 Philistine rulers, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites, living in the mountains of Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo Hamath. These people were left to test the Israelites, to see whether they would obey the commands the Lord had given to their ancestors through Moses. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and they intermarried with them. Israelite sons married their daughters, and Israelite daughters were given in marriage to their sons, and the Israelites served their gods. Ever wonder why God doesn't just remove the struggles in your life? Why he doesn't clear the path so we can just walk through without resistance? Well, here's an incredible example of that. Verse 2 in Judges 3 said, he did this to teach warfare to generations of Israelites who had no experience in battle. God left some challenges in place, not to punish them, but to prepare them. The next generation needed to learn how to fight, how to trust God in battle, and how to stay faithful even when surrounded by opposition. The same's true for us. If God removed every challenge, we'd never grow. We wouldn't learn to rely on him to strengthen our faith or to prepare for what's ahead. So if you're facing a struggle right now, don't see it as an obstacle. See it as training. God is preparing you for something bigger. Keep fighting. Keep trusting. And know that he's building you for what's next. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Michael Jarman. In the high-stakes world of competitive spreadsheets, where formulas meet fierce competition, one man rose above the rest. Michael, a financial modeling director from Canada, faced off against 11 of the world's best in the Microsoft Excel World Championships. With speed, precision, and mastery of functions, he outmaneuvered even the reigning 3-time champion, Andrew the Annihilator Nye of Australia. In a dramatic final round themed after World of Warcraft, Jarman tracked experience points, gold earnings, and simulated stats with unmatched skill, eliminating competitors one by one. While the battle took place in a digital spreadsheet, the intensity rivaled any physical sport. With just minutes to analyze an 8-page manual before the challenge, Jarman proved that mastery of numbers and logic can be just as thrilling as any physical feat. His victory earned him the title of Spreadsheet World Champion, a $5,000 prize, and a wrestling-style championship belt, securing his place in Excel immortality. So because Michael Jarman turned spreadsheet skills into championship glory and conquered the ultimate test of logic and speed, he is officially in the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. Trust is at an all-time low, and David Horsager has 40 proven tools to build trust now in your life and in your business. Taking a look at the Bible, we'll see someone who didn't live up to God's calling for their life, and Connor Stefanoff's dedication to his job, even in extreme elements, is delivering him into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up next week on Manly with Andy.